Oh my God. He's got him wrapped up like a baby.
Libérez les jolis